Owning a private airport can generate millions without ever selling a single plane ticket. A well-run general aviation field earns money from fuel sales marked up 30 to 60 cents per gallon, hangar rents topping $2,000 a month, and landing fees on every business jet that touches down. Yet in 2023, dozens of U.S. airports closed while sitting on land worth tens of millions. So why do some airports go bankrupt on ground worth a fortune? The answer starts with a paradox almost nobody outside aviation understands. An airport looks like a place for flying. It is really a place for renting. The runway is the product, but the product is not flights. It is the ground, and the air above it, sold by the gallon, by the month, and by the landing. Look at the raw numbers the FAA keeps. There are roughly 5,000 public-use airports in the United States. Only about 500 have scheduled airline service. The other 4,500 have no commercial airlines at all. No ticket counters, no boarding groups. Just pilots, private planes, and asphalt. Those 4,500 are the general aviation fields, and they survive on two kinds of money. Aeronautical revenue comes from fuel, hangars, and fees tied to the act of flying. Non-aeronautical revenue comes from rents, parking, and everything unrelated to airplanes. Hold on to that second category. It becomes the whole story later. But before the twist, follow the cash, and the cash begins where the planes drink. Fuel is the single biggest engine at most general aviation airports, and the airport plays middleman on every gallon that flows. That middleman has a name. It is the FBO, the fixed base operator, the company that pumps avgas into small piston planes and Jet A into the big turbines. The FBO buys fuel wholesale and sells it to pilots with a markup, typically between 30 and 60 cents per gallon, which sounds trivial until you understand the volume. The largest chains dominate the field. Signature Aviation, founded in 1992 and later bought by a Blackstone-led group for $4.7 billion in 2021, runs more than 200 locations. Its rival Atlantic Aviation operates over 100. These are not hobby operations. They are national real estate and fuel networks wearing an airport's clothing. Volume is everything because the machines are thirsty. A single business jet fill-up can exceed 1,000 gallons. One jet lands, tops off, and the FBO clears several $100s in pure margin before the crew has finished their coffee. Multiply that by a steady stream of arrivals, and the fuel truck becomes the most profitable vehicle on the property. Consider Teterboro in New Jersey, the busiest business aviation airport in the country, which sees roughly 500 operations a day and pumps tens of millions of gallons annually. A Gulfstream G650 carries about 4,000 gallons of usable fuel. At a 50-cent margin, a single full tank hands the FBO $2,000 in profit from one aircraft. Fuel, though, is fickle. It rises and falls with how often people fly. So the smartest operators lean on something quieter, something that pays whether the weather is perfect or terrible. That something is the hangar. Hangars are the unglamorous backbone of airport income, reliable in a way fuel never is. A pilot rents a hangar and pays every month, regardless of whether the plane ever leaves the ground. The small enclosures called T-hangars, shaped to tuck a single-engine plane in tail first, commonly rent for $200 to $600 a month. That is dependable, boring cash. Scale that up and the numbers get serious. Large corporate hangars, the kind that swallow a business jet whole, can command $2,000 to more than $10,000 a month. And here is the tell of how scarce this space is. At busy fields, waiting lists can stretch for years. In markets like Scottsdale, Arizona, and Centennial Airport in Colorado, operators have reported hangar wait lists running 3 to 5 years long, with some pilots parking outside on the ramp for a decade while they wait. When people line up for years to pay you rent, you are not running an airport. You are running a landlord's dream with a control tower. Rent trickles in month after month, but the airport still wants the flying itself to pay. That is where the toll booth comes in, because every arriving aircraft can be charged simply for touching the pavement. These are landing fees, usually built on weight. Airports often charge per 1,000 pounds of aircraft weight, quietly turning physics into revenue. The heavier the machine, the bigger the bill. A business jet might pay $100 to more than $500 per landing, and that is before ramp fees for parking on the concrete. At Aspen-Pitkin County Airport in Colorado, a magnet for private jets during ski season, peak day ramp and handling charges for a large jet can climb past $1,000, and during the 2021 Christmas week, controllers were juggling so many arrivals that jets were turned away for lack of parking. Small planes barely register. A light two-seater weighs so little that the fee, if any, is pocket change. So the toll is aimed at the wealthy end of the ramp. And there is a clever hook inside it. Many fields waive landing and ramp fees entirely if the pilot buys a minimum quantity of fuel. The fee is not really a fee. It is bait to sell more of that high-margin Jet A. Fuel, hangars, and tolls keep the lights on, but they all depend on people wanting to fly today. The truly resilient airport's plant tenants who keep the runway busy no matter what the economy is doing. Two tenants do this better than any other. The first is the flight school. Learning to fly is not a luxury purchase that vanishes in a downturn. In recent years, training demand surged, driven by a global pilot shortage. The airlines are desperate for crews, and the pipeline runs straight through these little fields. Boeing projects a need for more than 600,000 new pilots by 2043. Everyone starts in a training plane, burning fuel on somebody's runway. Big academies show the scale. ATP Flight School operates more than 75 locations and has ordered fleets of hundreds of aircraft, while a single busy training field like Deer Valley near Phoenix logs over 300,000 operations a year, ranking among the busiest general aviation airports in the nation. The second recession-resistant tenant is the maintenance shop, known in the trade as an MRO, for maintenance, repair, and overhaul. Planes must be inspected and fixed by law, whether times are good or bad. A piston single, for example, requires an FAA annual inspection every 12 months, and turbine aircraft follow rigid cycles measured in flight hours. MRO shops pay lease rent, and just as importantly, they drag a constant stream of aircraft onto the field. Every plane flown in for service is another chance to sell fuel. The mechanic keeps the fuel truck busy. Between fuel, hangars, fees, schools, and shops, an airport can look like a money machine. But we have only counted the incoming money. Turn the ledger over and the picture darkens fast because the costs of running a runway are brutal and, worst of all, largely fixed. Fixed means the money drains out before a single plane arrives. Start with the runway itself. Asphalt does not last forever. Repaving a runway can cost millions of dollars per project, and it is not a one-time expense. A typical general aviation runway rebuild runs $3 to $7 million, and a full reconstruction at a larger field can exceed $20 million. Runway pavement typically needs rehabilitation every 15 to 20 years, so every airport owner is quietly saving for a seven-figure bill that arrives on a schedule they cannot escape. The pavement is only the headline cost. Underneath it sits a constant hum of spending that never stops. Fields must fund runway lighting, snow removal in winter, perimeter fencing, and liability insurance all year round. A single snow removal broom vehicle for a small field can cost $300,000, and airport liability policies routinely run tens of thousands of dollars annually. None of that pauses when traffic is slow. An empty airport on a rainy Tuesday still burns money on lights, fences, and premiums. So how do so many of these small fields survive costs that never sleep? For a huge number of them, the honest answer is they do not survive on their own. They survive on public money, and that public money hides just how fragile the underlying business really is. The source is the FAA's Airport Improvement Program, known as the AIP. It distributes billions of dollars every year to airports for runways, taxiways, and safety projects. In a typical year, the AIP hands out around $3.35 billion, and the 2021 infrastructure law added another $15 billion for airports over 5 years. For a small field staring down $1 million repaving bill, an AIP grant is a lifeline, but that lifeline comes with a hook buried in the fine print. The hook is called grant assurances. There are 39 of them in the standard FAA sponsor agreement. Accepting AIP money triggers a set of promises that can bind an airport for 20 years or more. These are not gentle suggestions. Grant assurances legally restrict the owner from closing the airport or repurposing the land. In exchange for the government's help today, the owner signs away their freedom for decades. And this is where a beautiful business trap snaps shut. Imagine a privately owned airport whose surrounding town has exploded with growth. The owner is tired, the field barely breaks even, and the land is suddenly worth a fortune. Every instinct says sell. The federal obligations say no, because those grant assurances mean owners can be forced to keep operating aeronautically for decades, running a marginal airport they would rather liquidate. Breaking the promises can require repaying the federal funds, sometimes with interest, sometimes a staggering sum. The result is a strange kind of prison. The land value gains sit right there, visible, enormous, and completely trapped behind FAA obligations the owner cannot easily unwind. That trapped value is a clue to the biggest secret in this whole industry. If the land is worth so much that the government has to legally chain it in place, then the real money was never in the flying at all. It was in the dirt beside the runway. This is the twist that turns the entire film. Remember non-aeronautical revenue, that quiet second category from the beginning. At the healthiest airports, the ground beside the runway earns more than aviation ever could. Non-aeronautical revenue includes commercial leases, warehouses, and even solar farms on unused acreage. Airports are enormous, flat parcels of land, and flat land near a city is gold. So savvy operators lease their excess land for logistics, hubs, retail, and industrial use. A distribution warehouse pays rent every month and never asks for a runway light. Denver International, for instance, has leased land for a massive solar array and struck ground leases worth hundreds of millions, while Van Nuys in Los Angeles sits on roughly 730 acres surrounded by real estate that would sell for a fortune per acre. Once these leases stack up, the truth becomes undeniable. This off-field and through-the-fence development can dwarf the fuel income everyone assumed was the main event. When the land beside the runway out-earns the runway itself, a dangerous question surfaces. Why keep the runway at all? That question ignites the central war of the modern general aviation airport, a fight between the people who want to fly and the people who want to build. The pressure is geographic and merciless. General aviation fields were often built on the edge of town, back when the edge of town was farmland. Then the metro areas grew outward and swallowed them. Now those airports sit near booming suburbs, and the parcels can be worth tens of millions of dollars as housing or commercial sites. To a local government, that math is irresistible. An airport pays little in property tax and serves a small number of pilots. A shopping center or housing tract generates jobs, sales tax, and property tax forever. So local governments frequently push to convert airports into tax-generating development. The pilots see a beloved community field. The city sees an underperforming asset sitting on a jackpot. When that pressure boils over, the confrontation does not stay polite. It ends with bulldozers. And the most infamous example in American history happened in the dead of night with no warning. The place was Meigs Field, a small lakefront airport in Chicago. On March 30th, 2003, the city demolished it overnight. On the orders of Mayor Richard Daley, bulldozers rolled onto the single runway in darkness and carved giant X marks into the pavement, stranding aircraft still parked there. The FAA later fined the city $33,000 for closing without the required 30-day notice, and Chicago was forced to repay roughly $1 million in misused federal funds. By morning, a functioning airport was simply gone, destroyed before anyone could file a legal challenge to stop it. Meigs was raw and sudden, but the slower version plays out through negotiation in courtrooms. Consider Santa Monica Airport, hemmed in by some of the most expensive real estate in California. After years of legal warfare, the airport agreed in 2017 to close by December 31st of 2028. As part of that consent decree, the city was immediately allowed to shorten the runway from 4,973 feet to 3,500 feet, a cut that took effect in 2017 and pushed out many of the larger jets almost overnight. Not a midnight ambush, but the same ending. A famous airport on priceless land with an expiration date stamped on it. So the confrontation seems to end one way. The land wins. The runway loses. But that is not the whole verdict. Because some airports do not just survive the pressure, they thrive on it by finally accepting what they truly are. The survivors win by embracing the paradox instead of fighting it. The thriving FBOs stop thinking like fuel stations and start thinking like luxury hospitality. They bundle fuel, hangars, catering, and concierge services into a seamless experience for wealthy flyers who will happily pay for polish. The fuel is still there, but now wrapped in service. And the smartest fields go further, deliberately balancing aviation income with steady land leases so no single revenue source can sink them. Fuel is up 1 year and down the next, but the warehouse rent and the solar lease never waver. That balance turns a fragile airport into a durable one. The philosophy underneath is simple, and it flips everything you assumed. The healthiest airports treat aviation as an anchor tenant, not the whole business. The flying justifies the land use and keeps the FAA satisfied. The land pays the bills. Aviation is the reason the property exists, but real estate is the reason it survives. Which brings us to the verdict on this strange industry. A private airport is not really an aviation business. It is a bet on land, on patience, and above all on location. Profitability hinges on 3 things working together: fuel volume, the mix of tenants, and the demand of the surrounding community. Every owner lives inside a permanent tension. Federal obligations pull them to keep flying for decades, while soaring real estate value pulls them to sell and cash out. Where they land decides whether the airport thrives, stagnates, or gets carved with X marks at midnight. The most durable model refuses to choose purely. It blends flying with everything but flying. Which is why, when you strip away the fuel trucks and the landing fees and the roar of the engines, one truth remains. DHE Runway IS really real estate. So the next time you pass a quiet little airfield on the edge of town, look past the planes. You are looking at a landlord in disguise, sitting on ground worth a fortune, deciding every day whether to keep flying or finally cash in. If you enjoyed pulling back the curtain on this hidden economy, consider subscribing so you never miss the next story.